So it was a noon game at Auburn when Matthew Stafford finally became himself, which was the swashbuckling, gunslinging, if there ever was one, guy that everybody thought he could become in Georgia's shocking, and I'm going to let you know, it was shocking win over the Auburn Tigers, who were number five in the country at the time. Georgia got out 30, I think it was 30-7 by the half. But it was just a shocking display of what Georgia could be with competent play from Matthew Stafford. Again, I remember it really well. I'm not surprised Matthew's playing in the Super Bowl, but that fall day at Auburn, it was hard to know for sure if Matthew was going to be a lot of hype still or come into his own. And then that was the game when you could tell Matthew was becoming a big deal, the big deal. I did want to make sure that everybody's seeing DAWGSTRUCTION. Got it up on the screen right now. Just flipping through some of these pages. I know it's not the most efficient way to do this, but make sure you're ordering DAWGSTRUCTION now. We're going to be shipping these out very soon. You can still get it on that first shipment of books. It's 80 something pages of, excuse me, photos and stories that you are not going to read anywhere else. I mean, look at this image of, speaking of Auburn, Bo Nix getting run down by a couple of Bulldogs. So make sure that you are getting that book delivered to you. You're not going to want to miss out on that, y'all. It was such a fun book to put together, and it's going to be in your mailbox shortly. Make sure you're getting DAWGSTRUCTION right down below in that link. The week before the Georgia Auburn game, Georgia went to Kentucky, and Matthew played about as poorly as you could possibly play. I think it was 5 total turnovers, 4 of which were interceptions. 1 was in the end zone. I got to Auburn that morning in 2006, and I didn't have any suspicion that Georgia would win the game. There was no reason to suspect that. But right off the bat, I think it was the first drive. It wasn't the first play of the game, but I want to look this up so I don't get it wrong. Um, Matthew hit Sean Bailey, I think it was, for a huge throw. And that really, no, it was A.J. Bryant for 53 yards. And that set up Georgia at the inside the Auburn 10. And from that point forward, Craig Lumpkin took it to the house. Now, they were running on Auburn to begin with, but that play was, that one throw from Matthew to A.J. Bryant really set Georgia up the rest of the game. And, it's not like Georgia just went from there and didn't have mistakes. I mean, the very next offensive drive, after Georgia forced a 3-and-out, Matthew was driving them down the field, 1st and 10 at the 32, and he fumbles the ball, and Trey Blackman picks it up. But Auburn doesn't do anything with anything. I mean, on that next possession, Trey Battle has a pick six of Brandon Cox. No, he didn't have that. Was not the pick six. Trey Battle had like 2 interceptions in this game that really mattered a lot. That interception wound up being a field goal, and the next one put Georgia up. I think it was 17-0. No, that put them up 24-0. Excuse me. But Auburn couldn't do anything, and Georgia, meanwhile, was just steadily running the ball effectively, and Matthew was coming into his own. If you were to go back to that game, now listen, I don't know how big an underdog Georgia was, but it was significant. But this was the first time we really saw Matthew be able to control everything. He was 14 of 20 for 219 yards with a touchdown. He had a 53-yard run, y'all, in the rain. That was raining down there. He wound up with 83 yards rushing and a touchdown. That sounds like Stetson Bennett. I know we're not supposed to, give Stetson any more credit than he already gets, but that sounds like Stetson Bennett was playing quarterback for Georgia that day at Auburn. And honestly, You would have thought Stetson Bennett was playing at Kentucky the week before the 2020 version of Stetson, because it was just such a turnover nightmare. But that's when Matthew grew up. Um, I don't know if there was anything said. I don't know if there was, I just remember it seemed like the light came on. And from that point forward, he lost 5 games his entire rest of the way in 2.5 years at Georgia. Um, it was it was his coming out party for the first time. Now, if you remember, Matthew uh, was named the number 3 coming out of fall camp, which was kind of shocking with Blake Barnes. And then a week later, after the Western Kentucky game, Joe Tershinsky gets hurt on the first drive of the Carolina game, or second, one of the two. And Matthew has to go in there to play. And not only that, but it was clear this is against South Carolina, Steve Spurrier's second year at Carolina. And Georgia's defense was really good that night. This was the only time I think in Spurrier's career where he was shut out. Georgia won 18-0, if I'm not mistaken. But Matthew had to make plays, but he just wasn't himself. And then they just sort of survived the rest of the season until they got to Auburn. Joe Tershinsky was out. They survived UAB, or excuse me, they survived Colorado thanks to Joe Cox. But they were the Georgia was not themselves. The Mississippi State game, Florida, obviously, but it was the loss to Vanderbilt that knocked Matthew back into the starting quarterback spot for good. After the game, Mark Richt basically said, "All right, that's it. We're going with Matthew." And I think the next week was Florida. The week after that was Kentucky. And, it's not that Matthew played great the rest of the way, but the Auburn game was an indicator of things to come. He would lead Georgia down the field to win against Georgia Tech a couple of weeks later in a come from behind victory in the fourth quarter. And then against Virginia Tech, although his numbers were horrible, Matthew took them to win the game against Virginia Tech with another come from behind victory. And from that point forward, of course, they were a top 10 team, or, they went into 2008 as the number 1 team in the country. But it was really the 2007 season where, Georgia as a team played great. 2008, Matthew was hard to deal with. I mean, he was a great player for Georgia. But it was the 7 team that most people remember, the wins over Florida and Alabama, Oklahoma State, whoever, Hawaii in the Sugar Bowl. There were a lot of great wins. The loss to Tennessee cost them the SEC East championship and the ability to play for a national championship. And of course, they had been upset by South Carolina in Athens week 2 in 2007. But Matthew Stafford grew up and started becoming himself in 2006 at Auburn. He never lost to Auburn. Beat them in 6, 7, and 8. So obviously in 8 he needed a little Matthew Stafford magic to get that done in 2008. That was a real fight too. But it was the 6th game where, with the rain and everything, where Matthew became himself, I guess you could say. The one other thing about that game was, we're in the post game news conference, and here comes Mark Richt into the room. And at Auburn, the visitor locker room is directly adjacent. I mean, it was like you open a door and you're in a locker room from the press conference area. And Mark Richt came in there and he had his play calling sheets. And I think he said, I didn't think any of this would work, something like that. And you just never know in sports. And that game and that day, proved it, as Georgia rammed Auburn. I think, let me get the score right, 37-15. That was an Auburn team that could have won the national championship, and that totally sideswiped them in every way. Matthew ended that night, again, one more time, going 14-20 for 219 yards with a touchdown and 83 yards rushing on 7 attempts. They used to use Matthew running the ball. He also had a touchdown, but it was the moment where Matthew became more than a prospect. He became more than just a freshman people were wondering about. He became Matthew Stafford. It was down at Auburn in 2006. We'll see you over on the website.